Hi, I'm Finlay, and we're here today to interview Robert Swan. Would you like to start?
Could you briefly introduce yourself, who you are, what's your life story?
Yeah, my name's Rob Swan, and I always had a dream, ever since I was 11, to become the first person in history to walk on skis to the South Pole and then the North Pole. And with a huge amount of effort, we achieved that mission. So I actually am the first person in history possibly to have walked to both poles. That's the beginning of the story. And now I'm focused on the preservation of Antarctica for the year 2041. And I'm also very, very keen that people of your age feel inspired in life.
So it would be fair to say that you've visited the world's only human uninhabited continent more than the average person. So what first drew you there? What keeps bringing you back? Was there a particular moment, for example, that inspired you to dedicate your life to preserving the continent? And finally, why is it such a globally relevant place?
Antarctica is the only place in the world that we all own. Everybody. So divide, I think it's pushing on 8 billion people now on the planet, divide that into the area of Antarctica, and all of us have like a football size responsible for. And that to me is pretty exciting, that we all own a place. Secondly is that, thank goodness, people have only been actually standing on the Antarctic continent itself for only about 120 years. And it's untouched. And there aren't mines and oil rigs and hotels and roads, and there's nothing there. So that interests me. And I feel that what's drawn me back is a sense that we have a chance. I would not like to be your age today. I'm 100 years old now, so I'm okay. But I wouldn't like to be your age because you've got so much stuff coming in from everywhere. You know, social media, everything. And a lot of it's quite negative. So I feel that having a positive story about preserving Antarctica in the year 2041 is not a bad mission. And I think that people want that good news rather than the bad news. And that draws me back because Antarctica itself, as you all know in your world, it's quite hard to get through the white noise of all this stuff. But Antarctica still can get through that. It's such an extraordinary place that people go, wow, you know, that's interesting.
Yeah. Just briefly as well, you touched T41 Project. Where does the name come from for that?
Well, in 1991, governments got together who are relevant to the Antarctic, and they said, right, we're going to leave it alone for 50 years as a natural reserve land for science and peace. And that takes us to 2041, where people could start to talk about exploiting it. So I'm on it. And not very many people know that, and that's my job, to raise that issue onto the radar, especially amongst people your age.
Excellent, thank you.
From your involvement with industries, businesses, youth and much more, what significant progress have you observed as a result of your efforts?
Well, I don't know whether it's my efforts, but I do think that industry, business and commerce realise that to survive as a company, they need to get on this. Now, whether they're doing it fast enough, whether there's quite a lot of green washing, which unfortunately there is, but people are taking it seriously. 30 years ago, when I was talking about all these things, people sort of looked at me as that I was some sort of green hippie activist, but now it's about business, and that business has to make efforts towards sustainability in order to survive. My only issue is there seems to be quite a lot of blah 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 about it, and have they got a sense of urgency? That's part of my mission, is to push that on and get a sense of urgency.
Okay. One of your most famous quotes is, "The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it." Could you talk a bit about this? So how did this sort of message occur to you in the first place, and how can we counter this threat of people thinking that it will be solved for them?
I think possibly it's my only quote, so it's not one of my most famous quotes. It's probably the only one I sort of came up with. That I do feel, interestingly enough, especially amongst quite privileged people, that they believe that they can just carry on the way they are, not make changes, and that by magic it's all going to resolve itself. No. So that quote about, which is really saying get off your backside and do something, because it's not somebody else's responsibility, I think is really speaking to them. It's not speaking to some people who've got nothing in the middle of India or in the middle of Africa. No, it's speaking to people like us to say you've got to make a change, and it is your responsibility to make a change and take it seriously.
Your suggestions for younger generations when it comes to dealing with adversity and anxiety?
I think that you've only got one life. My mum died last year and she was 106.
Wow.
So possibly you're going to be stuck with me for quite a long time if the genes are on the game. But life is still very short. And my son Barney's now 30, he's having a sort of nervous breakdown because he thinks he's getting too old. But life is pretty quick. And I think that adversity is, there are people who have a really tough time with mental health and all kinds of difficulty. It doesn't matter whether you've got money or no money, there are some adversities for all of us. And I think that my advice is to try and look at a slightly bigger picture. You know, that we're on a planet in the middle of a universe that goes on forever. And according to present information, there's no one out there. So we're pretty much on our own. And that in a few billion years, this planet's going to blow up. So, and there won't be anything, it'll just be dust. So don't take it all so damn seriously. You know, let's look after what we've got, have a smile on our face, and adversity can be overcome by being positive. I think what I see, especially young people, and I feel sorry for them, is that when they're having a tough time, they sort of go down and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and they get sucked into this vortex of being down in the dumps. I think it's important to rise up and try and be positive, because no one's inspired by negative.
What are some major and realistic steps or inventions would you like to see made in order to preserve Antarctica?
I think what matters most is that I think everybody that's listening to this is a leader. Everybody that's listening to this, most people listening to this are going to be like a serious leader. Most people listening to this are going to be like a serious leader in life. And I think that what's important is, and I think people aren't going to change that much. People aren't going to change that much. That's just the way the world is, and that people from developing countries want to have all these things that we've got, all these fancy cars and all this stuff that we surround ourselves. They're not going to change, suddenly say, well, I'm going to surround ourselves. They're not going to change, suddenly say, well, I'm going to walk and I'm not going to have a mobile phone, I won't have a TV. So my view is that we should be able to engineer our way out of this. And I think that's perfectly possible. So my request, not advice to young people, is to say, get in and be an innovator. Get in, be the Bill Gates of solar power, and get in there and really make a difference. Don't just say, all I'm going to do is make money. Don't just say, all I'm going to do is make money, make it work. Be a leader, make it work, and use innovation, because we're really going to need it. To be honest with you, and straightforward, science has told us now exactly the position that we are in on this planet. And they're basically saying, look, you've got about 10 years to get your act together. And they're basically saying, look, you've got about 10 years to get your act together. Okay, let's double it to say it's 20 years. So I request people of your age to be thinking about, okay, well, what am I going to be doing? Where's
my life
okay,
going to
well,
go?
what am I
Innovation, technology.
Where's my life going to go?
and
Innovation, technology.
Almost balancing out the
and
fact that no one's really going to
almost
change. We're still
balancing
going
out
to
the
want
fact that
everything.
no
If
one's
everybody
really
lived
gonna
like
change,
they live
we're
in
still gonna
Geneva,
want
we'd need
everything.
3
If everybody
planets.
lived like they live in Geneva,
There's
we'd
only
need
one.
3
Very true.
planets.
So we need to change the game.
There's only one.
But that'll only happen
So we
through
need to change
innovation
the
and
game,
technology.
but that'll only happen
Okay.
through innovation
Thank
and
you.
technology.
What has your experience been with organisations involving and investing in the youth voice, for example? So, like the various conferences that have been hosted by the Villars Institute. What role do you think they play, and where would you like to see them going?
What role do you think they play, and where would you like to see them going?
I think it's fantastic that people get the opportunity to go to that frightfully posh hotel up in the mountains somewhere, and it's amazing. Wish I had that. I actually was there speaking, as you know, but I think it's fantastic they're doing it, and I think what young people who go and become a Villar scholar, is that the right word? Villar scholar? Fellow. Yes. Gosh, a Villars fellow is they've got to get hold of it, just like you have. You know, you got hold of it and doing stuff with it, because it can't be, look, I went there and I learnt a bit about the planet and climate change. It's got to be more proactive, and I think they're doing a really good job in starting to work on that. And part of that, obviously, is I'm going to Antarctica at the end of 2025, and I'm going to be speaking like we're speaking now. You may well be interviewing me like this when I'm in the Antarctic. Saying, Rob, what the hell's going on? So I think it's great what they're doing. I have a great deal of respect, and they're really starting to crank it up and listen to what the young Villar fellows are actually saying, because they're good at that, and I think it's moving ahead well.
For over 30 years to preserving Antarctica, what has been some of the most memorable moments so far?
Well, one of the memorable moments is that if I went to a big fancy restaurant in Geneva tonight, and I promise not to do it, and I stood on the table and said, silence in the room, with a very British, they'd probably shut up for a minute. And if I said to them, how many people know about 2041 in this room? 2 people put their hands up. So what's pretty memorable to me is that after 33 years of trying, I've sort of failed. But that means I'm not going to quit. So that's why I'm here, speaking to you all, and that's why I'm going to Antarctica to communicate using brand new satellite systems to get that message across. Because that's memorable to have failed. Memorable enough to inspire me, who would much prefer to go and sit on an island in the middle of Tahiti or somewhere, to keep going. So that's memorable because it's inspiring. I think the other thing is to see what people have done by coming with me. You should come on the ship. We're going at the end of 2026. And people go and they come back and they do extraordinary things. You know, this guy came from India and is now taking solar lights to people in the Himalayas that have never had light, at monasteries and all kinds of amazing things. So those are very memorable, what people have done with it.
Thank you so much. Who have been some of the most interesting and influential people that you've worked with? Who would you say is maybe worth looking into and following their efforts and maybe following in their footsteps as well?
Well, I know that Jane Goodall's coming here. Yeah. She has been a huge inspiration to me. Barney and I, my son and I, went to go and climb Mount Kilimanjaro, and we took all these people there, sort of beat them up a bit. And we decided that we should clean up our efforts from carbon flights and all that stuff. So we planted this whole lot of trees, and Jane came along. She'd bust her arm. She was, I don't know, 88 or something, arm in a sling, and came and was planting trees with one hand.
Wow.
I mean, she is an absolutely incredible person, and I really respect her. I've come across, I mean, politicians are really short term, so I've really got no time for them. I'm going to have time for them as 2041 gets closer. So I'm sort of, interestingly enough, eyeing a few people and thinking, well, could they be in the ring in 17 years? I think the sort of people that have inspired me are a lot of people who've come with me. I mean, I met a young lady, I bicycled around India once for 3 years on my own, and met I gave a talk, and this young lady came up to me on her bike afterwards and said, I've got to come to Antarctica. I said, well, how old are you? And she said, well, I'm 14. I said, well, you can't come until you're 18. And she said, how much will it cost? And I said, oh, $20,000 or something. And she said, right. And she came from a really poor family, and she spent 4 years swimming lengths, cooking, baking cakes for aunties there, and she did it.
Wow.
So it's those sort of stories that inspire me because they're full of hope.
Yeah. And I know you mentioned your son briefly, so what was it like travelling with him to Antarctica and then later seeing him start his own sustainable project?
North Queensland.
Well, I think it's a good point, is that my mother gave me some good advice to say, don't push Barney to be like you. In fact, it's a really good idea he isn't like you, which was good advice. So I let Barney come to me, and he came to me and said, Dad, our generation's really angry with your generation. We're not angry with Grandma's generation because they didn't know what they were doing. But you have known, your generation have known what you've been doing, and you haven't done enough about it. And I said, well, that's pretty impressive, Barney. Then he said, I'd like to go to the South Pole, and we did the South Pole expedition on renewable energy. And then he said, right, I'm going to do something on my own. And I think for a lot of young people who are listening to this, possibly they come from families where mum or dad have been possibly quite forceful and made a lot of money or something. And Barney wanted to do his project on his own without his annoying father. So he's raised a lot of money, got his act together, and I think being proud is a rather boring word. I'm seriously impressed on how he's done it, and I think he's a very good example to young people that no one signed him a cheque, because I got no money and he didn't have any money, and I think he's raised $5 million US so far on his own. So I think it's a good example of what's possible to achieve, and I still say to him, don't end up like me, Barney, because you'll go crazy. So, we're still work in progress.
To close off, do you have any recommendations, firstly, for immediate action that we as students can take?
I think the most important thing is to think about your impact. Everybody has an impact. And I cannot stand people talking about offsetting. It's such a cop-out. If you make a mess, you should clean it up. So every single person that's listening has a carbon footprint. Now that might be travelling to school, what you do at home, where you travel, do you go skiing, do you fly on an aeroplane occasionally? I'm not saying any of that shouldn't happen, but you should work out what your footprint is as a young person. And that might be dividing, if you've got 3 people in the family, you divide what the family does and you cut it into 3 or whatever it is. So I think first know what your impact is, and that's pretty easy to work out. There are carbon calculators, etc., etc. Secondly, my advice is don't panic and don't feel all depressed about what's possible and how we can turn this all round, and we need to, and we will. So carbon footprint, don't panic, and thirdly, think in terms of it being cool. That I think a lot of people who care about the environment at school were always put into the box of being, oh, well, they're the green people. I think it's got to be across the board. So it's quite a cool thing to care and to think seriously, because it's all going to happen faster than you think, of what are you going to study at university, what are your plans for the future, and even if you don't know what the plans for the future are, at least put possibly sustainability and the environment and innovation on that list. So your choice for the future. But out of all of it, I say don't panic, because I would not want to be your age with all the stuff that comes in and destroys all your brain cells. Rise up, chin up, and say, right, game on.